Up until now, I've been discussing Ansible key concepts and functionality while trying to simultaneously demonstrate some best practices. I want to make sure that those are clear so that when you leave the Ansible nest, you'll be ready to fly. So, first things first, we'll start at the top level with your overall project structure. So, I like to make sure that everything I need for a particular project is contained in one project directory. If we take a look at a tree of my Ansible project directory here, I have my inventory file, my main playbook file, which I typically call site YAML, but can be called whatever you'd like, the Ansible configuration file, a group bears directory that contains a variable file pertaining to all of my hosts and a variable file pertaining to database hosts, and a roles directory containing all the role components that I would need to utilize in my main playbook later. This is probably the most common setup you'll see, but you may also see a host VARs directory containing VARs files that pertain to specific hosts, multiple inventory files that are separated out based on environment type, e.g., production or staging, and any custom modules or plugins contained inside a library directory. Now, if we move on to my inventory file, so far we've just been targeting the one host, so this is a pretty basic file. We could expand that to have multiple groups with hosts, as seen in my amped up host file here. And this inventory file is a good example of grouping your host together by function, i.e., web server or DB server, as well as by region, as my group names have a region prefix to make it easier for me to figure out which hosts I want to target in my playbook. Now, I can also group my disparate groups together by using the children option, and so that I can target all my web server groups together or all my DB server groups together. And you can keep a similar inventory format for a file that instead targets your staging instances instead of your production instances. And since you have to tell Ansible which inventory file to use with the -i flag, this ensures that you will hopefully always target your host correctly. So, in previous lessons, I had mentioned that you can set various host and group variables directly in your inventory file. But I actually think a better practice is to either utilize a group VARs or host VARs directory that contains VARs files instead. In my opinion, this is better than muddying up your inventory file and allows you to keep your VARs file separate from your main playbook. Also, because of the nature of where Ansible looks for variables, any variables in a group VARs or host VARs directory will automatically be picked up. All you need to do is make sure that the file names inside of these directories match your groups or hosts exactly, and then Ansible will do the rest. So, taking a look at the all file I have in my group VARs folder, this would be a VARs file that would contain variables that would pertain to all hosts. So in this case, I just have a standard HTTPD port variable that would apply to every single one of my hosts. But I also have a DB servers file, which would apply to any database host that I plan on targeting. And variables in here would be specifically related to the database, like you can see here with the MySQL port. Now, if you don't want variables in plain text alongside your playbook, you can use something called Vault, which we'll talk more about in a future lesson. So, moving on to my main playbook file, the following are some of the best practices that you should integrate when writing your playbooks. First, keep it simple. Ansible is just like writing an English paper. Just because you can use four adjectives to describe something doesn't mean that you should. So, in terms of Ansible, less is more. And don't use every feature just because you can. Second, name your playbooks so that anyone coming in will know what's happening. The same goes for individual tasks. Name them something that makes sense to everyone if they're not familiar with Ansible. Third, keep white space in between your tasks to make it easy to read. As you can see, just because I have these white spaces in between my tasks, it just makes it look a lot more formatted and it's easier to digest. Fourth, always use the state parameter. Believe it or not, this is not required in any module that uses the state parameter. So it's important to tell Ansible exactly what state you want a package to be in, either latest or installed, or especially with the service module, what state you want the service to be in. And lastly, this is less about a specific playbook and more about your overall playbooks and files. If you want to keep a history of all the changes you make to your project files, keep it in source control and make sure when you do your commits that you're adding specific comments about what you're changing.